Critiques of veganism often stem from a lack of understanding and a reluctance to engage with its ethical and systemic implications.
We're ready for our next speaker, which is Emilia Leese. She's the co-author of Think Like a Vegan and has a podcast with the same name. And she's a co-founder of a rewilding project in Scotland. With a background in law, publishing, and environmental activism, she brings a unique perspective to ethics, sustainability, and social change. In her presentation, Emilia will discuss why the political left has overlooked veganism and how embracing it could strengthen efforts for justice, sustainability, and liberation. Please help me to welcome Emilia Leese.
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here this afternoon. And thank you so much to IARC for inviting me here. This is my first time here, and I'm absolutely delighted to have been invited and to participate. It's been a fantastic experience so far. My name is Emilia Leese, as you heard, and I have a bit of a varied background. So I'm the co-author of a book called Think Like a Vegan, and my podcast is also called Think Like a Vegan. I was a corporate finance lawyer in New York and London for close to 20 years, and now I write, as well as my book. You might find my work in other places. One of my latest pieces is in the magazine Current Affairs. And today what I want to share with you is a very short summary of a much more detailed work that I've been working on for some time, and hopefully will be my second book. And today what we're going to do is focus on these four areas. So we're going to focus on how is veganism marginalized in leftist political discourse, that veganism is already steeped in leftist tradition. We are going to talk about Marx, so if that's not what you want to do, it's probably a time to go. And then what can we do with all that? Oh, I should have said, there will be one photograph that is very old and that shows some dead animals. So, but it's one photograph. So, one of the great disappointments for me, and probably for you as well, and for many leftist vegans, is encountering hostility from other leftists about veganism. Discussion of anti-oppression and solidarity turn into their antithesis as soon as animals and as soon as veganism is mentioned. Express solidarity with animals, people, then absolutely you get heartwarming discussion. Express solidarity with oppressed animals, your interlocutor turns into a reactionary. Or a sausage socialist, an endearing term I learned from Troy Wittese. Our comrades on the left are people who understand the causes and effects of exploitation by the capitalist machine. They understand the injustice of it, and just as we expect they would extend that understanding to the 83 billion land animals slaughtered each year. At a minimum, we expect they too would be keen to discuss the role of animal agriculture that it plays in the Anthropocene. But in practice, the responses, the dismissals, and the resistance are really no different than those from any other non-vegan of whatever political persuasion. It's just our disappointment with the left that smarts more. And I'll come back to that smarting in a minute. Perhaps, it's not so much that there's an absence of veganism and concern for animals on the left, but a dismissal or marginalization of the practice itself, despite the scholarship. And I recommend to you this website, Against Animal Capitalism. They have an incredible bibliography that is pretty comprehensive on animal liberation, anti-speciesist work by vegans. whether the perception of the practice of veganism is that it's moralistic and bourgeois, or that it's a lifestyle rather than a systemic critique, or that there's no room in Marxism for anyone but humans, these concepts serve as easy ways, really, for leftists to simply not engage with the challenges posed by our use of animals. So let's look at some of these critiques. Is veganism moralistic? Well, you'll find the anecdotes here, some of them. I mean, they range in that way. It gets dismissed, veganism gets dismissed through stereotypes. But these critiques and the stereotypes, they fail to address the validity of the practice and are often used to dismiss and silence discourse. Like other non-normative political beliefs, such as socialism or feminism even, veganism disrupts societal norms, challenging entrenched systems of oppression, and that can cause discomfort. And discomfort is necessary for progress, as questioning relationships and norms is essential to advancing alternatives to the status quo. While vegans, like any other group, exhibit diverse behavior, their consistency in rejecting animal exploitation mirrors the principal stances of socialists or feminists, however annoying we might be, frankly. So when we ask whether something has an animal product in it, and when we say, oh, I take offense or I object to this particular view, it's not being moralistic, it's just actually conforming with your own belief system. And critiques of veganism often stem from a lack of understanding and a reluctance to engage with its ethical and systemic implications. So to foster productive dialogue, it's crucial to contextualize veganism within historical, geographical, and institutional frameworks, moving beyond the superficial judgments to address the deeper issues it raises. And this has echoes with other talks that you've heard today. I'm particularly thinking of Antonia's, in fact. Is veganism a consumerist lifestyle? Guess what? Veganism has been commodified, and so has everything else. All movements have been objectified under capitalism. They've all been commodified under capitalism. It doesn't diminish their political significance. And I want you to take a look at this box on the right here. So you've got these percentages and all these numbers and everything like that of all the plant-based products and the vegan products. These sorts of numbers and these sorts of things, they never take into account the tofu, the tempeh, the soy milk, and everything else that has been used, particularly in Asian diets, for a couple thousand years before plant-based markets were even a thing. So, again, don't take offense to this, but you might, and that's fine. So when we hear about health vegan or environmental vegan or other variants, again, all these things are fine, but they tend to reflect a popular misunderstanding or an incomplete understanding of the term and the practice. Sort of what has happened to feminism. It's no longer political. It's a matter of you leaning in. This sort of heady mix of capitalism and liberalism, muddying a philosophy and political tool to facilitate normalization and commodification. Think about girl boss merch. Think about Taylor Swift. Again, not making any judgments on her talents or her music, totally fine. Think about even Beyonce. They tend to be then commodified and then used as epitomes of feminism, which maybe that's not the case. But the real issue isn't any of that, really. The real issue is capitalism commodifies everything, obscuring deeper political and philosophical meanings. And I'll come back to this point as well in just a minute or so. It doesn't mean that even if you have all of this obfuscation, it doesn't mean that you discard the philosophy or the political tool. We just have to try to work a little harder to elucidate it. So instead of being moralistic or a consumerist lifestyle, veganism is a political building block, whether in challenging capitalist norms or imagining new relationships with nature, animals, and people. I believe the practice of veganism is inextricable from other praxes of social justice, and it's one component of dismantling oppression and creating a new society. Conversely, it's inchoate to eschew animal use and then ignore or participate in human oppression and exploitation. Veganism persists even in war zones. In Gaza, vegans continue to support themselves and others amidst oppression and genocide. In Ukraine, a free vegan soup kitchen operated throughout the war until mid-2024, and they've now pivoted away from that and are still distributing parcels of food to a variety of people, and I was delighted to run into them today. Well, this weekend. If Palestinians and Ukrainians can continue to manifest solidarity through veganism, at the very least, progressives should take veganism seriously, and all of us should take both of their struggles seriously. Focus now on the box on the right-hand side. In 1951, Leslie Cross, one of the co-founders of the Vegan Society, was very clear when he wrote that veganism is a liberatory movement for both animals and people, and that it aims to abolish exploitation and restore humanity's relationship with nature. And we'll hear echoes of this when I talk about Marx's metabolic rift. While if you read all of Cross's words, you might find some analogies and views that are a bit odd, and certainly reflective of his time. But the core message of liberation and reimagining equitable relationships, that remains vital. It emphasizes true progress lies in ending domination and fostering equality. And I'll remind you here of the commodification of veganism obscuring deeper political and philosophical meanings. And we see this clearly here with Cross's words. And many of us in this room, we'll know Cross's words, but many of us won't. And certainly the outside world definitely won't. These words, they're relegated to relative obscurity because veganism's foundation in liberation and equality is terribly inconvenient to capitalism. So, instead of all that, what else? How does veganism fit into the left? Well, it's already steeped in leftist praxis. As Marco Maurizi, a vegan liberationist, argues, liberalism's atomistic worldview, meaning singular, limits discussion of animal liberation within the confines of existing societal structures. Now, veganism alone can't dismantle inequality or redefine societal organization, but it fundamentally challenges the notion that a human flourishing requires animal exploitation. So more than just a dietary choice, it serves as a radical praxis, a radical practice, in other words, questioning dominant power structures and enabling individuals to disengage from one of capitalism's most exploitative industries. And it offers concrete steps towards envisioning a more just world. But regardless of the critiques, there's no justification for dismissing the rejection of animal products today. Whether as a systemic critique, a rejection of capitalism's exploitation of animals, or as a collective boycott, because that's really what we're doing collectively, veganism belongs in leftist discourse. While it extends beyond diet, food remains the primary way that we relate with animals and interact with them. So making our daily dietary choices becomes both a personal and political act. As a form of boycott, veganism already aligns with historic leftist social justice struggles, serving as both a material, so an actual in fact, and a symbolic act against oppressive economic and political systems. But a caution, without both the critique and the praxis, veganism can be hollow, and I can see why we get that critique sometimes. But still, it doesn't make its fundamental value hollow. It fosters solidarity with the oppressed, it challenges all forms of supremacy, and provides a radical shift in worldview that actually can be a catalyst for broader political transformation. And now we're talking about the left, so we've got to go to Marx. And there's a couple of things that I want to talk about here. One of the things that we hear is Marxism and progressive politics. They're inherently anthropocentric. One of the things that it comes from is this idea, this fact, that Marx and Engels were skeptical of the early animal welfare people. And it was because they believed that they were more interested in animals than they were in animal concerns. Whether that's in fact true or not, we don't know. And it doesn't actually really matter, because saying that, oh, well, Marx didn't like the animal people, is kind of a rigid interpretation that ignores the evolution of Marxist thought. While Marx did focus on human liberation, his framework, the framework that he actually wrote out in the philosophy, allows for expansion. And as our understanding of non-human animals has grown, many scholars have integrated animals' concerns into Marxist critique, very much like they've feminist concerns, racial concerns, ability and disability concerns have been built into that. So Marx and his views about animals were also products of his time. We need to contextualize that as well. And Ted Benton, a scholar, he said that Marx was simply wrong about animals. And in my view, that actually doesn't matter. Whether he was wrong, whether he was right, it actually doesn't matter. Since Marx, our knowledge about animal sentience and environmental science has expanded. But Marxist scholars today have already reinterpreted and extended Marxist theories to include animals in discussion of exploitation and alienation. And in fact, some argue that Marxist critiques of oppressive structures can and should address animal suffering. And John Sanbomasu, who has a fantastic new book out called The Omnivore's Dilemma, asks whether it's even possible to be a socialist without being an animal liberationist. And I would also ask the opposite. Is it possible to be an animal liberationist without being a socialist? Anna Peterson argues that while Marx's original work may not have included animal liberation, contemporary Marxism must address it, because both socialism and animal liberation challenge capitalist structures. Now, Christian Stosch, one of the things that you come up with in a Marxist critique is trying to figure out, well, how are animals categorized? Are they workers? And, where do they belong? And how should we look at them? And Christian looked at whether animals were workers or slaves or commodities. But his conclusion was that there's a despotic relationship of super-exploitation that integrates animals and nature into capitalism, and showing how both workers and animals are exploited in one capitalist continuum. And before I get to the last point, this is the one sort of graphic picture. This picture was sometime between 1910 and 1915. From the Henry Ford archives. And basically the Ford, as in the cars, as in the assembly line, the Ford engineers went to visit the Chicago stockyards and the slaughterhouses, and they saw how the people in the slaughterhouses were working one by one, just as you see here, and that's why it's in the Ford website. And they said, gosh, well, this is very efficient and effective. Why don't we do that? So you can see the continuum directly of animal exploitation into capitalism and into worker oppression, if you want to put it that way. You can see a direct line. Finally, we go back to Maurizi. He argues that Marxist theory can accommodate animal liberation by breaking the cycle of domination and recognizing the simple materialist notion that humans are animals, which is really kind of like the simplest thing. A couple of theoretical foundations that you may want to keep in mind in case you're ever having these kinds of conversations with people, saying that there are actual theoretical bits that you can look into. I have two here. I have more in the paper that will be coming out in the Journal of Animal Studies at some time this year. So we've got the first one. The first theoretical foundation is the metabolic rift. And this is a seminal theoretical point to the development of an overall ecological view of Marxism. And Marx uses the term metabolism in capital to refer to the movement and conversion of commodities where, and he writes, one commodity is exchanged for another. Social labor is metabolized, and the process ends with that result. So you see, it's a process, almost like a digestion, if you will. And he also uses it to address the relationship between humans and nature and the disruption of that relationship by capitalism. And Marx writes, capitalist production disrupts the metabolizing that goes on between human being and the earth. The natural elements that people consume as food and clothing can no longer return to the land. Hence, capitalist production undermines the eternal natural condition of the earth's lasting fertility, thereby ruining the physical health of the urban worker and the intellectual life of the rural one. So basically saying, the food that we used to eat, the clothes, we could put them in the earth and they would return to the earth. With capitalism, we really can't do that anymore. And he was writing this in the 1800s, so we know that. So these two concepts of metabolism, they seem slightly different, but they're mutual in terms of the morphing of commodities and the ongoing relationship between humans and the earth. And back to our friend Ted Foster, he first described the rift as occurring in the relationship between the two when the relationship ceases to be mutual and becomes an ecological crisis. Well, animal agriculture exemplifies and exacerbates this metabolic rift, which brings us squarely to the contemporary environmental context that we have here in the box to the right. It's different, this context here is different from that in which Marx and Engels lived. And now our existential crisis has to push all of us, especially the left, to have much broader conversations, particularly to radically address our collective consumption of animal products and the catastrophic impact of this. And that, perhaps different, isn't the right word. Because Marx foresaw capitalism would have negative effects on the earth as well as humans. In 1867, in Capital, he wrote this: capitalist production thus advances the technological means of social production processes and combines those processes more and more only by damaging the very fount of all wealth, the earth and the worker. That is pretty contemporary, I think. The extent and gravity of the damage and its consequences, which we now face, is hard enough for us to fully grasp, and we have the help of scientific knowledge. So it's really unthinkable that Marx, if he were around today, would react passively or dismissively to our current situation, much as sometimes we get the feeling that the left is doing. Not on the environmental context, but on the animal portion of that. And as we saw in the previous slide, as we all know, without tackling animal agriculture, environmental sustainability remains unattainable. The second theoretical foundation is alienation. And again, Marx didn't include animals in this concept of alienation, but the analysis doesn't have to stop there just because he didn't include them. And the concept itself, the concept of alienation, relates, and this is Marx writing, relates to the problem that capitalism prevents humans from living up to their potentials. What are these potentials? Well, they may be to organize in a new society, perceive history, or already possess the end result of the labor process when the process begins, as an idea the worker imagines. And meaning, so people have the ability to do this, they come up with an idea, and then they make it, and they make it a reality. Now, there's a variety of things to say to this, about this, but that these potentials don't apply to animals necessarily isn't really dispositive, just as not all humans can fulfill or even be aware of such potentials. Today, with all the ecological studies informing us of the similarities between ourselves and other animals, and many more to be discovered, we're not barred from some strict interpretation of the word from expanding this concept to include animals. And this next quote, I really would love for you to listen to it carefully, because it really struck me. In Capital, Marx writes, "Even before he begins to work, his own labor has already been alienated from him, appropriated by the capitalist, and incorporated into capital. Thus, his labor is constantly objectified during the production process in a product that belongs to someone else." When I read that, I couldn't help but think about the dairy industry and how it absolutely exemplifies alienation, subjecting cows to relentless cycles of forced impregnation, birth, mechanized lactation, removal of the children to the much distress of them both, and so on and so on. Both the mother's reproductive labor and her child, they're commodified even before birth. And that really illustrates the deep exploitation inherent in this system. So, all of this, what can we do? Well, veganism is a central component of progressive praxis, justice, and solidarity. I believe we need to return to unambiguous ethical and political implications of veganism. Think back to Cross's words. There's no ethical compromise there. Non-vegans don't compromise with us vegans or with anyone else to convince us back to their side. They have their position, however wrong it is, and they stick with it. Instead, what do? We waffle, we welfare, we reduce, we flex, we, in short, appease. We must find the courage of our convictions and center them. Compromising others' lives for the sake of appealing to those who don't care about those lives in the first instance won't uplift our concerns, our focus, those humans, and the animals who are oppressed. For the left to move beyond dismissing or marginalizing veganism, it must instead engage deeply with its ethical and systemic implications. And we, in this room and outside, we must lead on that. Back to our friend Marco Maurizi. He says, it's only by an act of solidarity that humans can decide what happens to them and their other. In other words, it's only in praxis, meaning it's only in practice, in the actual things that we do, that the question of what the human being is can be decided. But what does that mean? I want to unpack that because I think that's a few words, but they're complicated. So if you take a look again on the right side, I seem to have put a lot of things on this right side. Veganism is already an active political commitment that shapes the relationships between us, animals, and the environment. And what it means to be human, again, going back to this idea that Marxism is only for humans. Even the idea of what is human is not just discovered through philosophy and science and these sorts of things. Marx said something I think is very interesting. He said the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. So, our humanity is ultimately defined not by these abstract principles, but by how we practice our ethics, how we demonstrate our ethics, and that includes towards animals. It's a revolutionary perspective. Angela Davis also says so. She says that food, she has identified it as a crucial site of struggle. And I assume people here know who Angela Davis is. And in her talks, she often echoes the disappointment that I talked about earlier about the left's failure to critically examine their role in the capitalist food systems. And if we think about it, the left's marginalization of veganism weakens its own political impact, because even Davis herself used to rarely highlight her own veganism. She's been vegan for something like 50 years, or maybe even more. And lots of people don't even know that. Now she emphasizes it because she has identified it as this revolutionary perspective, and she advocates for compassionate relations beyond humans, challenging the capitalist industrial food system, which commodifies both life and perception. We're so trained to have this one type of perception, and we can't even imagine a world without capitalism, just about. So, including animals in our political thinking and practice isn't sentimental or extraneous to Marxist or progressive thought. It's part of a broad approach to liberation. It's an extension and deepening of Marxist and progressive critique. Finally, veganism changes everything. Someone said to me, well, that's a big statement. I'm going to say, yeah, it is, and I own it. I'm completely fine with that, because it is. How do I know that? Because it changed me. It changed every single one of you. And it's transformed you entirely. You know it, I know it. In good ways, bad ways, annoying ways to others, I'm sure. So we start our transformation in understanding that our relationship with what is and what isn't food, right? That's the basic. Then we realize, oh my gosh, clothing. Then we're like, oh my gosh, our homes. Oh my gosh, the things that I use to clean and whatever and whatever and whatever. Everything we use has a component of animal exploitation. And then we connect more dots. We connect those things. How is food produced? We connect it to human exploitation. And then we learn how everything is entangled. When progressives exclude animals from that understanding, then that understanding itself is incomplete. And vice versa, mind you. If vegans exclude human entanglements, that's similarly incomplete. Progressive politics must expand to include vegan praxis. It plays a critical yet overlooked role as a component of building a just world where liberation is for everyone. Because in all cases, whatever happens to the least of us happens to all of us. As Claire Laberge suggests, she's got a great book called Marx for Cats. She's vegan also. Most of the people I've mentioned here are vegan. All of them are, actually, except Marx and Engels. Just to be clear. She suggests post-capitalism isn't imagined, but materialized through collective action. And I find that to be pretty powerful. And as our imagination evolves from that collective action, new relationships become possible. And this vision excludes a world of animal farming, climate change, and suffering. Thank you so much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Emilia.
These are my contact details, and didn't talk about Think Like a Vegan, but if you are interested in my book, I have a handful of copies with me.
Yes, we have a short time, but we have room for some.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. Important topics. And I couldn't help but notice in this meme or this comment which you shared, I have two remarks on that. Vegans would get a lot more sympathy for their cause if they weren't so it's not our cause, it's the cause for the other animals. And so we are having a cause, yes, but not for ourselves. So
Yes.
that's a very narrow-minded viewpoint. And then further in that comment, I can read it there. Say actually lean more on structural critiques instead of shaming individuals. And there were some talks on this conference where people agree or disagree if it's more to blame the end consumer or individuals or the whole system of oppression, which is interlinked, like the meat, dairy, the whole animal industry. And I think one affects the other. It's like a symbiosis. So you can't say, oh, only this side is causing all of the problem. It's interlinked, in my opinion.
Absolutely, I completely agree. Everything is entangled, without question. And that can seem daunting, but that's the reality. I mean, okay, it's daunting. And we can either do nothing and you know, like this. I don't know how you call that, if there's a word for that. But anyway, or we can do something. And yes, it's entangled. And yes, we are in a big mess. And yes, that is the case. And sometimes there aren't easy answers, and sometimes there are imperfect answers. We need to get comfortable with that, because that's reality. That's like something that we deal with every day. If we're looking for a perfect answer, we're not going to find it. If we're looking for the perfect method, we're not going to find it. I don't believe anybody who tells you otherwise, because they don't know either. They're just making it up. You know, we need to keep questioning, and we need to keep pushing. But we need to keep it, you know, it's a political tool. It's a philosophy, and it's a political tool.
We
Yes.
have
one question
time
there
for-
and one question there. Maybe?
Yeah, okay, we take 2 questions, and then we're out of time.
Okay.
Hi. I just wanted to say I live in 2 different, how you call it, systems. Not only the capitalism, also the socialism. And I find both a failure. So for me, Marx is a little bit difficult, because we were really tortured in school with Marx and his ideas. And maybe you can help me to find a way to get out there, because
Yes, I can.
If I hear Marx, I get
Right.
some
Well,
problems.
actually, what I would suggest, there's a fantastic new translation of Capital that came out in September of last year. I would suggest picking that up and reading it. And maybe what you were taught in school would be a little bit different. Yes.
Okay.
The last question there.
Oh. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Again, from the shadow. I've worked in the left. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can actually they actually give you a platform, and the first thing I want to say is that Marxism is pure betrayal, because in the First International, Bakunin and Marx split, and the idea is that Bakunin didn't want a system that was dominated.
I'm not going to get into that, because we're going to be here for 16,000 days.
Yes,
and that's probably not helpful to anybody else.
Yeah, but when I went to Marxism days of the SWP in London in 2018, and I mentioned veganism to them, the leadership didn't like it.
Yes, I know.
But the rank and file, the youth that was there, they were,
Yes,
because it was
that's
new to them.
fantastic.
It was new to them, because they are there because they
Good for you
stand
for
up
bringing it
against
up.
injustice.
Yes.
And that's what we need to make clear to their rank and file.
This.
And that is actually our task. We can go in these parties and unravel the treason. We can take the mask
Completely
of their
agree.
leadership.
Bring your veganism wherever you are, wherever you go. That's really important.
How long will you stay at the conference, Emilia?
I will be here till tomorrow at some point. I can't stay. I don't think I can stay till the end, but I will be here till the afternoon. So I'm around. Thank you again so much, and thank you to IARC.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you,
really
Emilia.
fantastic.
Let's give her a big hand.